I'm Jedediah Caesar, and I'm a C.O.L.A 2021 Visual Arts Fellow. I think one of the things that shaped a lot of the way I work is that I became involved with education pretty early. I've been an educator for, I should have counted this up ahead of time. I don't know, I'm going to say in the neighborhood of 17, 18 years. A lot of the time that I've been an artist, I've also been teaching. So I think first teaching sculpture, and I think that has sort of lent for me, an awareness of having sculpture be a dialogic space. And that in turn, I think, made me think a lot about spaces like that in the world in terms of relationships between objects, their environment, how they're read, how their reading shifts and changes between individuals and over time. I approached this project thinking about my understanding of the whole site and the stories that I heard people telling, and information, for example, about the Lloyd Wright house and its kind of use of what's called Mayan revival, which is a kind of imagination of a kind of Mayan aesthetic that gets transformed, in a sense, into this kind of ornamental project. So I was thinking about how to make the Municipal Art Gallery into something that had its own kind of, well, I'll back up and say, that kind of idea, that idea of taking on another culture and of using a kind of formal aesthetic cultural language as a kind of ornamental language, reminds me of architectural forms that are called follies, which you often see in gardens, and are often kind of wealthy individuals commissioning a building that is sort of quasi-functional and has all these kind of fantastical elements. So I thought about this Lloyd Wright house as essentially a folly, and as the Barnstable as the civic garden. My thought was to use that building as a kind of space to add a kind of ornamentation to it, and to then reflect on that Lloyd Wright house and the kind of whole totality of the space through this intervention. So ammonites are in part a continued fascination I have about landscapes and material. I think fossils are a particularly interesting material because, in this case of the ammonite, for example, and as it relates to a kind of architecture at the Barnstable, what we know of it is this kind of shell of a creature. There's never been a fossil that records the kind of soft tissue of an ammonite, so we don't know what an ammonite looks like. So when we say ammonite, we mean shell of an ammonite, which is, I think, in itself kind of distinct and interesting. It's kind of, we understand it by its architecture. I had been looking for, I thought we were going to be scanning ammonites and using those as the basis for this project. And then just looking for references a long time ago, and I was going through notes of things I'd collected and realized that I had this sheet of drawings by Haeckel. And so I was looking at these things and thinking about the way that he's already reimagining the object. Looking at the drawings, you can see that they're elaborate. I feel like his work was in terms of thinking about these ideas, it felt again like a great kind of like foil to the sort of Lloyd Wright. He's not an architect, but he's a sort of a creator of a visual language. He's a maker, and so I felt I could borrow it essentially. But then further, it gave us something to transform ourselves. So those drawings then became the basis for digital drawings, which became the sort of three-dimensional renderings that we have. So I was really lucky to collaborate on this project with two young architecture students, Jessica Cua and Vincent Arnado. And so they're doing a lot of the imagining with me. What we're doing is sort of building these ammonites and then doubling them. In other words, making them symmetrical, which is a kind of strategy of ornamentation, is to take it, they sort of add symmetry and take a thing that you recognize in the world and turn it into a motif through symmetry. So we're doing that. And so they look a little bit more like, how can I describe them? They're a little bit more eyeball-like, right? They're circular. They're not just one spiral that comes in. They kind of double in on themselves. So they even more than I think like a regular ammonite, they have like a gargoyle-like quality because they're something else. They're not just a reproduction of an ammonite. They're actually been made, maybe there's something that doesn't exist in nature. There's something more perverse. I'm really aware of this unadorned building. I mean, to me now, when I look at it, it looks like it's been stripped of ornamentation because I've already in my mind adorned this building with all of this ammonite language. So it's just kind of funny now. It looks completely bare and unfinished. I mean, I hope that people come away with the experience that in kind of untangling this project, and it gives like it sort of encourages a set of tools for untangling other spaces. And I tend to think of my projects, tend to think that if my projects are successful, there'll be some resonance in other kinds of spaces, not necessarily even art spaces. And that's how I understand their value. That they kind of bleed out into the world.